The Washington Post apparently buried a story on Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito flying an upside-down flag at his home in Alexandria, Virginia on January 20th, 2021, the inauguration of President Joe Biden. In fact, it waited until the New York Times broke the story on May 6th, 2024, more than 3 years later. The fact the story was buried is even more significant now that it has been reported that an Appeal to Heaven flag, a symbol used by Capitol rioters in 2021, was pictured flying outside of Alito's New Jersey beach house. On Sunday, the Post ran a story on Alito and the upside-down flag, pegging the incident entirely on his wife, Martha Ann Alito, which had already been reported. Now that there are two flag incidents, the latest being the pine tree flag, which dates back to the Revolutionary War and symbolizes resistance to England, and which was resuscitated during the Capitol insurrection on January 6, 2021. Needless to say, it provided tons of fodder for the X-Sphere to feed on. Here's Joe Scarborough of Morning Joe and Jen Psaki on MSNBC.
For a guy who is a Supreme Court justice that let that happen at his own home in one of the most fraught times in American history since the Civil War is just sad.
Now, it goes without saying that a Supreme Court justice displaying these far-right symbols raises some major ethical questions. On top of that, these symbols were displayed as the Supreme Court was taking up cases related to the insurrection.
But some in conservative circles are pushing back on this, and they're saying, here's, for instance, Republican Arkansas Senator Tom Cotton.
This is just another partisan smear against Justice Alito because he's an outstanding justice who upholds the Constitution and the laws as it's written.
Confirmation process.
Do you think maybe justices should just stop having flags outside the House? Any concern about there being a flag there?
You know, people who are judges on the Supreme Courts have personal lives, they have families, and I don't think they're necessarily responsible for everything their families do or say. So I know Justice Alito.
Isn't there an expression, run it up the flagpole to test it out to see if it's a good idea? Don't you think Alito should have run up the flagpole, the idea of flying various controversial flags outside of his family houses with his wife before it happened?
Look, I'm going to say the same thing I said about the upside-down flag, but I think even more forceful. I had no idea and suspect that the Appeal to Heaven flag has had nothing to do with like January 6th or insurrection until the media invented that about 5 seconds ago. This is a flag that has meant many things over the years, but originally was meant as resistance against the British. It has been used in all sorts of contexts. There was one flying over San Francisco's City Hall, as far as I can tell. This seems to be an invention that this obviously means he supports like overturning the election in favor of Trump.
I think actually this is a much stronger case than the upside-down flag.
Why?
Because this is a flag that has had meaning since the 18th century as a flag that's pro-revolution. Now, depending on what the revolution is, it's not necessarily a bad thing. The flag I saw in some photographs was put up during Black Lives Matter protests near the White House. The same as the upside-down flag was flown during Black Lives Matter protests.
Yeah.
So the question isn't whether or not he's like an evil man for having a certain kind of political belief. The question is whether, as a justice of the Supreme Court, he has an obligation to not literally fly a flag advertising his political beliefs when he's supposed to be impartial, just, and fair.
Maybe he's has it in the original 1776 context that America should be patriotism and independence for the United States versus our monarchist oppressors in England or something like that.
Maybe, Robby, or maybe he flew a flag that is pro-revolution at a time when there was an insurrection happening against whatever you want to call it, a riot happening at the Capitol, when a huge portion of the country believed, because Donald Trump told them that an election had been stolen, and he chose to stake his flag in the sand, as it were, and telegraph to the world where he stood on this particular issue.
What if Elena Kagan had a Black Lives Matter flag on her property? I wouldn't care.
If she's overseeing cases about whether or not the Black Lives Matter organization has a right to exist, or whether or not the Black Lives Matter organization, like this.
I would utterly not expect her to recuse herself in that situation at all.
Let's talk about what these flags are telegraphing. If you support revolution in the context of the riot on the Capitol, that's telegraphing that you, like the rioters on the Capitol, believe that the election was not fairly won by Joe Biden. What then are you supposed to do when a case is brought to you which asks you to weigh in on whether or not Donald Trump did in fact attempt to steal the election, or whether or not he rightly thought that the election was stolen from him and was simply trying to explore legal avenues to correct an error? Are you able to weigh in on a case like that when you've already articulated you have a clear view of what you think happened, that you think in fact the election was stolen, that you support the insurrectionists, or again, whatever you want to call them? I don't want to get caught up in these semantic games. I don't really have a dog on this fight. That's a very different thing. If there is a case about whether or not supporting the cause of Black Lives Matter doesn't necessarily mean you have very strong feelings. I can say someone committed a crime in the context of a Black Lives Matter protest, even if I support the goal of defunding the police, let's say. But this is something that is really square on to the kinds of cases that Alito is being asked to oversee.
I mean, I think we're being naive, though, if we expect our Supreme Court justices to just be utterly blank slates with no preconceived...
No, I expect them not to fly a flag outside of their house about their political beliefs.
About a generic affirmation of the spirit of, yes, revolution that this country was founded upon, that its founding documents came into existence to oppose monarchy and to extend equal rights and First Amendment rights and Second Amendment rights and all those things that we embrace as a country and are part of our civic heritage and have been appropriated by all sorts of movements arguing for greater liberty and greater recognition for them and their rights. And I think it's a nothing burger, but...
Context matters. Anybody else flying this flag, it's not an issue. Alito flying this flag in 2020, maybe it also is not an issue. The idea of him raising this flag in the context of what was happening, an actual run on the Capitol, which many people wrongly believed could result in the failure to certify the election results, is a different and very specific kind of message. And it's his mere obligation. No one is asking him to evacuate his brain of every political belief. Obviously, these justices go through an ideological vetting process to be put on the bench by conservatives and Democrats alike on the bench.
And to be clear, he did not, as far as I can tell, the New York Times, photographs of the Appeal to Heaven flag obtained by the New York Times show that the flag was above his home in July, and so it's like it's been left up. It's not like he put it up. I don't know when it first went up, is what I'm saying. I don't know that it was January 6th happening. He put up the flag to be like rah rah January 6th, but.
According to judicial canon for federal judges, a judge should perform the duties of the office fairly, impartially, and diligently. A judge should perform those duties with respect for others, should not engage in behavior that's harassing, abusive, prejudiced, or biased. This is about behavior. This is about your external manifestation of your impartiality. And if Alito wants people to take him seriously and not consider him to be a pure partisan actor that is exacting his individual will over the courts in indifference of the law of the land, then he should consider not flying flags that are associated with an insurrectionist movement, the likes of which he is literally being asked to weigh in on as a member of the highest court in the United States of America.
Should we surrender things like this flag, which has stood for all sorts of other, again, for the noble causes of the American Revolution? Should it be surrendered? Should it be allowed to just be appropriated by the January 6 people, if they're even doing that, which I see no evidence of?
Alito should not be flying it. I don't care what anybody else does. God forbid a Supreme Court justice
people
is a
start
job.
saying doing thumbs up or high-fiving people is a far-right gesture. I'm like, well, I disagree with that.
This isn't that.
To high-five people.
This isn't that. This is a flag that means rebellion, and that's not a bad thing. There's lots of different kinds of revolutions. No, the context matters. If your country is in the middle of what some people see as a revolution against a stolen election, and you seem to do a gesture that says that you're on the same side as those people, that is a very different thing than having an abstract support of the idea of people resisting abuse. And you've pushed back many times on this show about revolutions and forms of resistance that you personally don't agree with, whether it's the Haitian Revolution or whether it's the events of October 7th. Revolutions obviously can be looked very differently in different ways by different kinds of people. They're context dependent. And the question is whether or not Alito, either in error or intentionally and with very poor judgment, chose to multiple times lift flags above his residences that telegraphed an allegiance with a movement that believes that the 2020 election was stolen, when Alito himself, as a Supreme Court justice, is going to be asked to decide cases that are relevant to the outcome of the 2020 election.
Well, you let us know what you think about this in the comments. We'll take a look at those. More Rising right after this.